There are photographs that sit quiet on a shelf until the light shifts, and then they start talking. In the county archive of Willow Creek, Texas, there's a wedding tintype that won't stay silent. The emulsion is foxed at the edges, the bride's lace veil sags like a tired cloud, and the groom is a neat arrangement of Sunday manners and borrowed respectability. Behind them, a line of kin whose faces are so alike you could shuffle them like cards. But it's the bride's eyes that stop you. Under the right angle of lamplight, they seem to hold more faces than the room could possibly contain. Like the glass remembered a second crowd that the camera never dared to show. The photographer who made that picture, one of those traveling men with a wagon darkroom and hands that always smelled faintly of collodion and sulfur, left a notation on the paper sleeve. 2 plates. Second plate, not to be shown. No explanation. Just a smudge of flash powder and a fingerprint that might be soot, might be something else. They said she married well for a girl with no acreage and a mother's debt weighing on her spine. They said the family was generous. The sort of generous that names roads and buys pews. They said the photograph proved it. A bride in white, a table heavy with silver, a promise that the house would keep her safe. But in August of that year, the cicadas fell silent too early. The parlor mirrors were draped, though no one had died. The veil refused to lie flat, puckering as if it knew what was being asked of it. And after the vows, while the men praised the roast and the women whispered about hemlines, doors began to close with a politeness that sounded like mercy, until you listened harder. What happened at that feast would become a rumor that outlived the house, passed from porch to porch, traded at church picnics in lowered voices, dressed always as charity and duty. The bride's smile in the tintype is small enough to fit inside a thimble. Her hands are folded in her lap, because someone out of frame told her to fold them. If you tilt the plate, just so, a hairline crack runs through her ring finger all the way to the edge, a thin, bright seam like a promise splitting. This isn't a ghost story that hides behind jump scares. It's Texas heat and etiquette, a family pact older than the wallpaper, and a photograph that never blinked. Some truths don't need volume, they just need time in the fixer. Where are you watching from? And is this your first visit to Tales Never Told? If you want more of the stories polite history tried to bury, subscribe. They called it the Whitlow Place. A long, low house set where the prairie met a stand of blackjack oaks, its galleries wrapped tight as bandages around a wound. The clapboard looked pale even when the sun bled out over the scrub, and the windows, good glass hauled in by wagon, were veiled inside with lace that kept out dust and questions. The Whitlows owned the mill, the store, and the debt ledger most folks in Willow Creek pretended not to recognize on sight. In town, they were benefactors. Out at the house, they were a weather system, with high pressure in the parlor and storms that never quite broke. Eliza Hart seamstress, debt-burdened, the only daughter of a woman with a cough that never left, came to the Whitlow porch, because there was nowhere else to stand. Her mother's account at the store had turned from ink to chain. The doctor's tinctures had outpaced the coin. The offer came folded in a linen napkin. Clear the debt, fix the roof of their shotgun house, and put a ring on Eliza's hand from the Whitlow safe. The groom would be Alden, the eldest son. A good match, said Mrs. May Whitlow, the kind of woman who could embroider a kindness so tight it cut off circulation. The Whitlow boys were a set of matched knives. Alden, Ezra, Cyrus, shiny on Sunday, mean when there was nothing to hunt but time. Their father, August, wore respectability like a coat that didn't quite fit around the shoulders. At church he shook hands in measured arcs. At home he watched the clock and the people in his house with the same expression. A man taking stock of what belonged to him. The house had rules like commandments and little bells hidden in the corridors to summon what could not be spoken. The kitchen door swung on a special hinge that never squeaked. There were keys for the liquor and the linen, and a separate ring for doors that had no locks until that summer. Doors learned, like people do. Eliza said yes because it sounded like air. She loved her mother more than her own name. She was 19, with needle-pricked fingers and a backbone taught by necessity to stand straight, even when the floor tilted. The wedding would be in August, under a sky the color of a bruise. The photographer would set up in the parlor because the dust kicked up too much on the lawn. The family would gather, smiling with their mouths' eyes cooled to cellar temperature. And a single plate, just one, said Mrs. Whitlow, would be chosen as the picture that lasted. The man who would catch their likeness was named Silas Finch, a traveling daguerreotypist turned tintype specialist, a careful creature with wrists like tuning forks and a little boy's wonder for how light behaved when you coaxed it. He arrived 2 days early to test the room. The way late sun spilled through the lace, the bounce off the gilt picture frames, the silver bowl that hurled back a small sun of its own. He breathed in the house and frowned, as if someone had just pressed a penny-shaped bruise into the air. Finch kept a ledger of every household he'd photographed from Abilene to Galveston. Private notations written in a secret hand his wife called fox tracks. He wrote down the Whitlow's order wedding plate, family grouping, a small portrait of the bride, a loan for the lady's mother who cannot attend, and then, without thinking, added, "Remove the mirror from the mantel. It shows what it shouldn't." "Superstition," Mrs. Whitlow chided, lightly. "We drape mirrors only for mourning." "Then, let me pretend we were Christians of caution," Finch said, almost smiling. She did not. On the second day, he asked Eliza to sit for the practice plate. "Look toward me, but past me," he said. "Think of the idea of a window." She did, because Eliza had always known how to obey in complicated directions. In the glass of his lens, he saw a face that understood the price of things, even those she had not yet been asked to pay. His hand went steadier. He made another note that afternoon after the brothers wandered in and out of the doorway like tomcats. "House full of eyes," he wrote. "One pair belongs to someone standing where no floorboard creaks." Then, because he slept light in strange houses, he asked the cook quietly where the servants kept their pallets. "In the summer kitchen," she said, not meeting his gaze. "The house keeps its own nights. Best place to be is not in it." That evening, Finch wandered the grounds, pretending to admire the cotton rows. He saw the oak at the edge of the yard with a length of new rope coiled neatly at its base, as if it were a tool as respectable as a rake. He saw a shed door, newly outfitted with a bolt, that shone the way a man's tooth does when he laughs at the wrong time. He saw a window whose lace had a small rip, as if someone's hand had gone through it soundlessly. In his ledger, he wrote only, "August heat oppressive. Recommend earlier hour. Bride appears tired. Photographer too." The vows were set for 6 to outrun the worst of the heat. The parlor smelled like violets and vinegar, the sharp tang of collodion, the wilted sweetness of flowers that had learned how to die slowly. Town folks arrived in wagons, faces scrubbed hard enough to shine. The preacher wore a collar that had starched itself into a pinion. The Whitlow men lined up by height, which made them look like a staircase. Eliza's dress was the kind you make when a family intends to be seen, heavy satin with seed pearls sewn at the bodice by a woman with good eyes and sore thumbs. Behind the veil, her mouth was prim as a pinned seam. Only the pulse at her throat betrayed a mutiny of drums. May Whitlow took Eliza's hands and held them a heartbeat too long. "You look like a blessing," she said, the words warm and weightless, like steam. "I look like I was chosen," Eliza said, and if anyone heard the weariness, they pretended it was gratitude. The vows themselves went down easy because people were practiced at swallowing. The preacher's voice floated over them like a raft. Alden said "I do" with the same tone he'd used to tell a stable boy to fetch water. When it was Eliza's turn, she thought of her mother's cough, of the shiny coins Mr. Whitlow had pressed into her palm and then taken back to settle the ledger, and she said the words like she was threading a needle through coarse cloth. The feast unfolded like a church program blessing, slicing, toasts. The roast was perfect, because the cook knew fear, sharpened a knife. Laughter rose and fell in polite waves, breaking on the same rocks. Finch moved silently among them, setting his lens, asking for stillness in a house that mistook stillness for goodness. The first plate caught the sanctioned scene. Bride and groom, seated. Family ranked behind. The matriarch's hand a pale spider on the back of the groom's chair. In the long exposure, Cyrus blinked and blurred, so that his smile seemed to have teeth where none belonged. Finch set the plate aside to develop in his portable dark room by the kitchen, where the summer heat turned chemicals into weather. "Another," May said, handlight on Finch's elbow. "For the family album." Her voice put a lace doily over the idea, so nobody would think to ask why. "The second plate would require different light," she said, which was another way of saying different rules. The men rose as if summoned by a bell no one claimed to hear. Eliza stood because the room tilted that way. Finch adjusted the lens, heart thudding. Still as Sunday, he coached. He poured collodion, counted breaths, watched, and for one slivered instant before the image locked, he thought he saw a figure in the hall mirror, another Eliza, veil unpinned. Eyes the storm itself. When he blinked, she was gone, leaving only the proper bride and the proper family and a room that smelled like something had just been blown out, after the toasts and the cake cut with a sword that had never seen war. Someone began moving chairs with the tenderness of an undertaker. Doors clicked. Women gathered crystal and left it in neat armies on sideboards. The cook lit lamps along the corridor, and their small flames leaned as if someone had just exhaled near them. Finch pretended to fuss with his chemistry, because pretending kept men like him from being asked to approve. Mrs. Whitlow laid a hand on Eliza's arm and kept it there until the room was only family and those they considered furniture. "The night is long," she said gently, "and the house is old. It has habits. A Whitlow bride learns them on her first night, or not at all. She did not mention the tradition, because traditions are arrogant. They believe you already know their names." In the Whitlow house, there was an understanding like a well-worn staircase. A new bride was welcomed by the men the way land is welcomed by a flood, claimed by anything that could reach her. The word they used for it in the back hallway was honor, which is how a thing becomes unarguable. Alden went first because rules kept the world from sliding into the ditch. Ezra poured 2 fingers of rye and grinned at the wall. Cyrus folded a napkin so carefully you'd think it was a map. August sat like a judge with bad posture. There were cousins and an uncle who had come in from Bowie County with dust on their boots and entitlement in their pockets. The matriarch watched the air. Eliza listened to the house's lungs. She had been warned in 100 polite ways. The jokes about strong stock, the winked stories of grandmothers and their duties. The seamstress silences. She had not believed until the pewter clock struck and the bells under the floor chimed in a way the cook had not taught them to. It isn't necessary to say what was done, only that it was expected and then exacted. Eliza's no found only surfaces to break against. The doors kept learning, shutting themselves until the sound of wood on wood became a language. And later, when the corridor was as quiet as a tamped grave and the lamps had burned down to their small last lives, someone no one would say who laid the veil over the back of a chair like an apology. In the summer kitchen, the cook sat up with the scullery girl and told her a story about a saint who had kept her eyes when men came to take them. She hid them, the cook said, in a dish the color of sky. The girl stared at the sooty ceiling and did not ask what color the sky was in a house without windows. By morning, the house had smoothed itself like a bed someone made in a hurry. The parlor looked innocent. The silver reflected anyone who needed to see themselves. The first plate, proper and stiff, rested in a velvet sleeve, a keepsake the size of a man's palm. Finch carried the second, unset, in a separate wrap, its chemicals not yet fully married to their secrets. He would fix it later, he told May. You will have them both by week's end. Just the first, she said, honeyed. The bride's tired. We've decided one picture is plenty. Finch, foolish, argued. The second plate has artistic merit. The house prefers modesty, she said, and showed him to the door with a smile that did not belong to people, but to safes. Eliza did not see him leave. She was visiting her mother, escorted in a Whitlow wagon by a Whitlow servant who sat a respectable 3 feet away and did not speak except to say, "We're nearly there." In the shotgun house, the air smelled like cedar and boiled sheets. Eliza's mother touched the veil as if it could tell her anything true. "How are you, Dove?" she asked. Eliza said the words she had been taught to say, when stitches slipped and ladies asked, "He is kind, the house is grand, we will be comfortable." Her mother, our eyes were the same gray as Eliza's, but older, like a road uses itself up. "Comfort," she repeated, and coughed until the little glass on the nightstand trembled. When she could breathe again, she said, "When you were a baby, you'd look at a thing like you were deciding whether it was worthy of your attention." "Keep that, even if you must keep it inside." On the way back, the wagon hit a rut that jarred Eliza's bones loose. The servant never took his eyes off the road. "Sorry, miss," he said reflexively, as men do when a thing is bad and can be fixed. That afternoon, the matriarch showed Eliza the cedar chest at the foot of the master bed. "Every bride puts something in here," May said, "so that when she has to remember, she has proof that she was welcomed." The chest held ribbons, dried flowers, a ribbon of black hair braided into a complicated knot, a small blue shoe that could not have belonged to any of the living. "You may place your veil inside," May said. Eliza laid the lace down like a bandage and closed the lid. A week later, Finch found that the second plate refused to behave. Under the red glow in his wagon, the image shifted like a thing trying to climb out of a story it didn't like. He poured developer, silver nitrate, patience, and his own small belief. The shadows came forward in steps. In the finished picture, the family stood as before, but their faces had slid a fraction, as if a breath had passed between their bones and their skin didn't love them anymore. The mirror in the back of the parlor had caught a slivered reflection. A seam of the hallway, a smear of white lace in motion, a hand gripping the doorframe so hard it left an impression on the wood, and there too, at the very margin, the matriarch's eyes directed not at the camera but at the mirror, meeting the other gaze as if to say, "Remember your place." Finch showed the plate to his wife, who had never liked the way he brought strangers' faces home. "Send it back for the fee, then burn the negative," she said. "We don't profit off people's shame." "But what if it saves someone?" Finch asked, surprising himself with his own hope. "Pictures don't save," she said. "They testify. The saved part is for people." He wrapped the plate in cheesecloth and tried to return it, but the Whitlow boy at the gate said there was no need. The household had all it wanted. Finch carried the plate to the post office, then back out again, then home, where he hid it behind a print of a hill no one had ever bothered to climb. The Whitlow house settled into its habits. Eliza learned which foothalls belonged to which men. She learned the weight of a bolt and the sound of a key turning when you are not the one who turned it. She learned that if she sat at the little window at the end of the upstairs hall at exactly 4 in the afternoon, the light would find her hands and make them look like someone else's. Sometimes she found herself saying we when she meant they, which was how houses like that fed. The town's rumor mill started slow because Mrs. Whitlow had invested well in the church roof and the school books. But women are archivists by nature, and a few details started to stick to each other in the pantry of Willow Creek's collective memory. A bridesmaid who had been told to straighten the rug in the hallway found a smear on the baseboard, the color of old cherries. The preacher's wife brought over a pie and heard, through 2 doors and a polite laugh, a sound like someone asking God to come more quickly than he planned. The stable hand noticed that the master bedroom door had a new lock, but the locksmith never collected his fee in town. Eliza wrote letters to her mother and then shredded them into threads because the house did not like paper wandering. In her work basket, beneath the scrap muslin and a little box of needles, she kept a stub of pencil and a sliver of blue ribbon from her wedding bouquet. On a morning when the sky had the audacity to be kind, she bound the pencil to the ribbon, pricked her finger, and wrote a sentence so small it looked like a secret taught to ants. Every house has a hidden door. She did not know where the door was. She only knew she would need the sentence when it appeared. A cousin came to pay respects the next week, a man with breath that made sugar smell like a threat. He lifted the veil from the cedar chest, pressed it to his face, and told a story so vile it died before it left his mouth. Eliza listened to the room around the story, the clock, the flies, the way the wallpaper seemed to lean back as if to say, "Not on me." When the cousin reached for her hand, she made the smallest movement with her wrist, and his ring caught on a pearl stitch in the lace. The stitch popped. The sound was no bigger than a moth, but Eliza felt it go through the floor, into the joists, into the idea of a house that had decided it would not keep all secrets forever. The hidden door found Eliza, finally, in the pantry behind the second dining room, where a wooden shelf didn't quite meet the wall. If you lifted the shelf and slid your hand where the grease had darkened the boards, there was a notch. If you pressed, the panel loosened like a held breath. Behind it, cool air and the memory of old preserves, and a passage narrow enough to remind you were mostly bone. She discovered it by accident, which is how truth likes to be found. She was hiding from Ezra's drawl, from Cyrus's card tricks, from Alden's practiced kindness that scraped. She pressed the notch and slipped into the dark and shut the door with her body, heart juddering until the whole world pulsed in time. The passage ran along the inner ribs of the house, behind the walls, a quiet artery. It gave onto a place under the stairs where a girl could sit and count the steps above by the weight of the Whitlow men. It fed into the summer kitchen so a servant might move soup to the table without crossing the parlor. It breathed. If she stood very still, Eliza could hear the house thinking, wood settling, prayers gathering, the rods of the family's cage striking their own small music. The first time she used the passage at night, she thought she might be sick from the fear. But the fear behaved itself, as trained fear will, when it senses it might be of use. She moved toward the back hall where the door had learned to close by itself. Through a crack, she saw May Whitlow sitting in a chair like a general, knitting something that was mostly air. The matriarch's lips moved. She was counting. Eliza counted too, and learned without language the family's schedule of trespass, the order in which a body might be claimed. Knowledge, Mama Hart had once said, was a blade that cut both ways. Eliza ran her thumb along its invisible edge and bled on the inside, where no one could see. When Eliza's mother died that September, the church bells tolled and the Whitlows sent a wreath big enough to frighten a horse. May gave Eliza a black ribbon to wear until Advent. "We'll keep you busy," she said. "Work is the best prayer." The house kept its own vigil that night, the men moving quieter for the novelty of it, the doors holding their breath. At the graveside, with the dust still blooming over the pine, the preacher's wife took Eliza's hand in both of hers. She squeezed in a way that said, "I know which is a dangerous thing to say if you don't intend to help." Eliza did not squeeze back. She looked at the preacher's wife's neat hat and thought of the river that ran behind the mill, how it had swallowed a calf that spring and looked innocent again by supper. Back at the Whitlow house, a visitor waited on the gallery. Harlan Pike, a surveyor by habit. A quiet man who read deeds the way some men read poems. He had mapped half the county because he liked to know what dirt belonged to whom, and also because he liked to stand in a field and call a line into being with string in sight. He had come to propose a new fence for the south pasture. He had also come because the cook's sister had told him a story about a sound, and he did not like sounds that did not belong to weather. He took off his hat. "My condolences," he said. "I knew your mother. She hemmed my cuffs once and told me my left leg was longer than my right." He smiled like a man who didn't mind being known. Eliza said thank you with her eyes. The matriarch said it with her mouth. "We shall keep our girl right here in comfort," May added, and Eliza heard the iron under the velvet. A train-made promise. That night, Eliza went into the passage with a candle she did not light. She sat under the stairs and listened to the house talk. It loved the Whitlows in the way an old tree loves the children who climb it, even as they break a few of its finest branches. Houses are complicated. So are trees. So are women who live in both. The second plate, Finch's troublesome truth, did not stay hidden. Nothing in a small town does. 20 years later, when Finch's widow moved to Houston to live with a cousin, she sold his equipment to a young photographer who specialized in photographs of boxing matches and promoted himself as a man who could make a silk purse of any sow's ear. The plate rode along in a box marked Misk. In 1905, it ended up in the back room of a cigar shop down by the depot, where the proprietor would, after hours, let men come. Look at a curiosity. A wedding photograph that made their hands feel unclean. It survived a flood and 2 greedy hands. It survived a policeman who thought to use it as a teaching aid about female deception. It survived, finally, to be purchased in the 1930s by a school teacher with a spine like a yardstick who intended to burn it to purify the town's memory, and then could not bring herself to do it. She hid it in a book about the Alamo, where it grew thin and holy with the press of years. But back when it still might have saved a life, it sat behind Finch's Hill print, humming to itself. "Pictures testify," his wife had said. "So they do. A testimony needs a listener." Willow Creek preferred hymns. In the second winter of her marriage, Eliza learned the Whitlows' quiet language for continuance. Babies were expected, like rain. None came. The doctor mixed tonics that tasted like penny nails. May whispered remedies with roots in old country superstition and new country cruelty. "A woman's body is a field," she told Eliza once, stirring tea with a spoon that had been in 100 mouths. "It must be properly turned." Eliza excused herself to the pantry and swallowed down a scream until it became a kernel of something hard and useful. Without a child to put between herself and the house, Eliza grew thin and careful. She moved like a cat that had learned which floorboards tattled. She took the passage at hours when even clocks grew bored. She wrote letters to no one in particular and hid them behind loose bricks letters about the shape of the moon when you look at it through a keyhole, about the sound of men's boots when they try to be soft, about the taste of iron in the morning. She wrote, "Every house has a hidden door. Every town has one ear. We need a mouth." Harlan Pike, the surveyor who liked to draw lines and then step over them, found one of the letters when he came to measure the back pasture and leaned against the chimney to make a note. It slid out like a bird with no sense. He did not read it at first out of respect for things people tuck away. Then he did, because men are men, and there was a name at the bottom that made his heart pitch. He put the letter back and spent 3 nights staring at the ceiling, making maps of the humankind, how a person might get out of a place without leaving a trace but scent. On the 4th night, he went to the Whitlow fence line and stood until the dogs recognized him as part of the landscape. He waited until the moon slid under a cloud and then knocked once on the kitchen door the way a man knocks who has come to pay a bill. The cook opened. "For God's sake," she whispered, and let him in. What happened next became the kind of story that refuses to pick a single moral. Harlan and the cook and the scullery girl and the seamstress, Erez boy who ran errands arranged a way for Eliza to leave that did not look like leaving. There would be a funeral, someone's aunt in Goliad. Respectable grief, and Eliza would ride out veiled and return light and not come back at all. The passage would get her as far as the summer kitchen. The cook's sister's wagon would take her to the crossroads. After that, Harlan had a line drawn across the county big as hope. On the appointed day, the house fought back. Doors that had learned to close gentled themselves and then slammed. May wandered into rooms she never visited and arranged flowers until they looked like something else. August mislaid and found keys with a frequency that suggested coincidence had gone to church. The cousins arrived without notice to cheer spirits, smelling of tobacco and old claims. Eliza felt the house choose. The cedar chest at the foot of the bed seemed to breathe. The mirror fogged not with weather but with will. The bells in the hallway, the ones under the floorboards, stayed quiet as if they had been told to pretend there was no need. At sundown, when the plan said go, the cook nodded once. The scullery girl pretended to trip and drop a tureen loud enough to turn heads, and Eliza slid into the passage with the sound of soup covering her footsteps. She moved through the house's ribs, counting like the matriarch had taught her to, saying the alphabet of her own name to keep her hands from shaking. In the summer kitchen, the door to outside stood ajar by an inch, a mercy big as a barn. She reached for it, and a voice behind her said softly, "My dear." May stood there with her knitting, the needles serenely clicking. The matriarch had the kind of smile women wear to baptisms and hangings. "Every bride thinks of running," she said. "It is a rite of passage." She stepped aside as if to let Eliza go, which is how a certain kind of cruelty enjoys itself. "You could leave now," May went on. "You could go out into a world that enjoys a scandal and forgets a woman, or you could stay and be remembered as a Whitlow, which is eternal in a way shirts are not." Eliza looked at the door and the woman and the little fire in the cook stove that made everything smell like onions and courage. "I want to be your story," she said, and stepped into the night before the house could change its mind. People ask where she went. The versions vary. Some say San Antonio, sewing dresses for women who wore gloves even to think. Some say New Orleans, where a woman can become a new name if she blows the dust off enough men's memories. Some say she died before the first frost and the land took her, and the only thing she left behind was the scratch line of a map on a scrap of paper. A route that could be walked in the dark by the kind of woman who counts steps like prayers. What we know is this. A month later, the Whitlow place was quieter. The bells stopped their strange chiming. The cousins found their reasons to be elsewhere. The matriarch began visiting an empty cedar chest and closing it gently each time, as if the action itself might someday contain a person. And in the town archive, years later, when the second plate finally surfaced, someone held it up to the light and saw a sliver of a woman in motion, veil trailing like a comet, and understood that sometimes a photograph is not a record but a door. It does not deliver you. It tells you where the hinges are. If this chapter unsettled you, it should. Some houses were built to keep certain truths inside. We carry them out one story at a time. If you want more hidden rooms opened and more polite myths interrogated, you're in the right place. This is Tales Never Told. Subscribe, tell me where you're watching from, and share this with someone who thinks old photographs are harmless. The next parts go deeper and they're not easy to hear, but they're necessary. The Whitlow men responded to absence with ownership. They petitioned the sheriff to declare Eliza a runaway wife, which in Willow Creek had the weight of scripture. Notices went up at the depot, the store, the church bulletin board where bake sale lists ran alongside warnings about wolves. May paid for a reward poster that used the word wayward, the way some people use rope. Harlan folded the poster once, then again. until the word disappeared. He rode out of town by the long road, hat low, and came back the same day, having been seen at the ferry by 3 people who told May over supper. He had placed a decoy and a rumor on the same day, and the two would gnaw each other for weeks until no one remembered what they had been arguing about. The preacher who had married Eliza to a family, because men in suits insist on believing their work is holy, came by the Whitlow place to offer prayer. "God knows where she is," he said, and May answered, "So do I." And her smile made his spine check its measurements. In the kitchen, the cook set bread to rise and pressed her thumb into the dough harder than necessary, leaving a print that meant, "I saw her pass through the night. I saw her become a kind of weather." The house sulked. Yes, a house can sulk. The doors misbehaved in small ways. The stairs creaked where they shouldn't tea. The parlor fire licked at the logs like it had learned a new trick. August poured rye in the exact measure he always had, then poured again, and never felt the warm ribbon down his throat. Alden sat on the edge of the bed that didn't have his wife in it, and thought about what the word possession meant when it had to live in a room with silence. 2 weeks into the search, a letter arrived at May's hand, addressed in a tidy, unremarkable way. Inside, a single sentence, written small enough to slip between teeth. "Every house has a hidden door. Nothing else." May folded the paper, set it gently on the table, and looked at it, the way a woman looks at a viper she has not yet decided whether to kill or wear as a necklace. The Whitlow myth suffered its first public crack at a harvest social, when Cyrus, drunk on rye and grievance, told a story that was not meant for the open air. He laughed about initiation, and the words slid off his tongue and landed on the floorboards, where they lay like nails for people to step on. The room went very quiet in that thick way that reveals the shape of a silence. A woman from the school board set down her lemonade so carefully it didn't ripple. The preacher's wife's hand found the underside of a chair and held on. If there is a hero in this part of the tale, it is not a man with a badge or a gun, but the town's bookkeeper. A woman who knew how to arrange columns until money told the truth. Her name was Ruthie Coles. She handled accounts for half the county and had signatures that didn't belong to her under her fingers all day. She had seen May pay for a locksmith twice in 1 month and then buy lace in bulk. She had balanced the church's books and noticed a line item called repairs that held more shame than wood. She could add to 100 and make you agree it was 100, even if you had wanted it to be 99. That soft authority spilled sometimes into the rest of her life. After the social, she walked home with her ledger under her arm, eyes straight ahead like a woman stepping across a creek. She had a key to the schoolhouse and a habit of staying late to oil the typewriter. That night she oiled it until the machine and her heart both ran smooth, then typed a letter to the editor of the county paper, under a pseudonym, not naming the Whitlows, but naming a practice that would make a town rot from the inside. She wrote the way she worked numbers, spare and exact. She ended with a line that would echo down the church aisle on Sunday, whether the preacher said it or not. "Tradition is just a word for habit that can bear scrutiny." The letter ran. People pretended not to know who it meant. May dropped 2 more coins in the collection plate and a promise with interest for new hymnals. The preacher delivered a sermon about Sodom that somehow never reached the Whitlow porch, but the quiet that followed was different. It was full of edges. Harlan found Eliza in a boarding house 3 counties over, where she had signed the register as Miss Hart and taken in mending because a needle is a passport if you know how to use it. He did not knock on her door. He left a bundle wrapped in paper, a pair of boots that would not blister, a map that made a path look like mercy, and a note that said, "I will not be your rescuer, but I will be your accomplice." Eliza did not cry. She laced the boots. She folded the map into her pocket. She went to the landlady's desk and paid a week ahead. She wrote a letter to the cook that said, "Take the passage. I left the panel loose. Every house has a hidden door. Yours is a kitchen." The cook did not leave, because not all heroes run. She stayed and helped 4 girls over the next 2 years find reasons to be in the summer kitchen at odd hours. She taught them to hold a hot pan like a shield. May, for her part, visited the cedar chest so often that the hinges forgot how to be surprised. One afternoon she set her knitting inside it a length of something that hadn't decided whether it was a scarf or a noose, and closed the lid carefully, as if it were a grave. Even she, it seems, had learned the house's language enough to know a story was closing itself around her wrists. Years passed the way they do when a town decides to age around a secret. The Whitlow's influence thinned. Children grew up and left without kissing the porch column. The mill burned and was rebuilt smaller. Ezra took to playing cards with men who didn't mind losing if it meant keeping their wives. Cyrus married a woman from San Marcos who kept her own name and her own knife. Alden took ill and died in a bed that felt like a courtroom at the end. Harlan married the school teacher with the yardstick spine, which surprised people who had expected him to end a story alone. Together they kept a drawer for other people as evidence. Behind a print of a hill no one climbed. They hid Finch's second plate, and on certain nights when the wind made the old house creak, they took it out and held it up to lamplight. "Testimony," she would say. "A door," he would answer. They did not have children. They did not regret it. They taught half the county's children how to read a map and a ledger and a face. Eliza, who had learned that freedom tastes like exhaustion with a salt rim, worked her way downriver to the coast, then east, then north. In one town she stitched curtains you could hide behind. In another she sewed a christening gown for a woman whose husband's hands were gentle and shaky, and whose eyes made Eliza think of a sky she could look at without flinching. She did not plant roots. She planted rumors that a Whitlow bride had outrun a house and lived. She left maps under sugar bowls. She folded hope into hems. She taught girls to keep a coin in their shoe and a sentence in their mouth. On the 50th anniversary of the Whitlow wedding, the church printed a little pamphlet of town history. There was a photograph in it, a proper family, a bride in lace, a mirror in the back that showed only a well-behaved sliver of room. The caption read, "Prosperity. Ruthie Coles, now gray and exact as ever," penciled in the margin of her copy. Not the whole thing. Time did what it always does. It forgot on schedule. The Whitlow place sank into itself. Honeysuckle and regret took the porch. Children dared each other to run up and touch the door, then ran shrieking from their own courage. The last Whitlow, an old woman whose eyes were May's and whose hands shook when they weren't knitting, sat in a rocker and watched the road that didn't bring anyone. One spring, she opened the cedar chest and found a veil with a single pearl missing. She pressed the cloth to her face and inhaled 80 years of dust and salt and women. She closed the lid and, at last, turned the key to a position that meant there would be no more openings. Decades after even that, a grad student with a nose for uncomfortable archives came to Willow Creek to write a thesis about gendered ritual and the architecture of control. She found in a box mislabeled "Pastoral Scenes" Finch's second plate, wrapped in cheesecloth and paper, that had browned to the color of apology. She held it up to the fluorescent lights of the county office and watched the mirror give up its sliver of motion, the hand on the doorframe, the bride not staying put. The grad student pressed her palm to the glass, unconsciously, as if to slap hands with a ghost at recess. "I see you," she said, and in the hum of the lights, the plate did what pictures do best. It kept telling the truth. She wrote her thesis and made enemies and a few friends. She gave a talk in the church basement that made the preacher's grandson uncomfortable in a way that might one day become integrity. She donated a copy of the plate to the town, which hung it in the library with a placard that said, "Photographer unknown, bride unknown, truth known." People stood in front of it, longer than they meant to. Some looked away, some pointed to the mirror and asked their children if they saw the hand. Some reached for the hand without thinking, and the librarian watched their fingers hover and thought, "This is how we make the past earn its keep." Eliza Harte's grave, if there is one, is not in Willow Creek. Her name, if she changed it, is not in the ledger. Her story is stitched into the hems of dresses nobody kept and the memory of a map drawn thin as a vein. The house is gone. The road forgot its dust. But the line persists. Every house has a hidden door. Every town has one ear. And our job, the reason this channel exists, is to help the truth find its mouth.